This video is sponsored by Mary Yuchia, Alchemy Queen. A game made by me. Do you like the economy? Do you like crafting? Then, oh boy, do I have the game for you. Help Mary Yuchia become a successful alchemist by making the right choices, befriending the right people and keeping her out of troubles in this innovative fantasy turn-based shop simulator that is all about creating the best potions, executing best enchantments and, most of all, avoiding to pay as many taxes as you can. Exciting stuff, I know, link in the description. Now, back to the topic at hand. Remember when I made a video about No More Heroes 3 a few days ago? Good times, good times. Yeah, long story short, game is ass. Very disappointing experience, not recommended. But I'm not one who enjoys reveling in my own misery, as much as that would seem the case. So, immediately after I was done editing the Foo video, I went and installed on Steam another Suda51 game I have very strong opinions on, Killer is Dead. I was just done playing No More Heroes 2 at the time I first heard of it, back in 2013. I fell in love with that game. To me Goiki Suda was the man. I had to get my hands on all of his projects, Killer 7, Shadow of the Damned, Lollipop Chainsaw and the first No More Heroes, but Killer is Dead was my absolute priority. It just looked so fucking cool. I had to have it as soon as it came out. But it's been so many years since I last played it, does it hold up to my current, more refined critical skills? Or is Killer is Dead, like No More Heroes 3, just another step in my personal journey to the realization that Suda51 has always been a fraud? Let's find out. Now, what is Killer is Dead about? When it comes to describing its story, that's quite a loaded question, actually. But we'll get to the details at a later time. For now I'll just give you a short recap of the game as a whole. Killer is Dead is a hack-and-slash game centered on the life of Mondo Zappa, a US government agent affiliated with the Bryan execution firm, who lost his memory and his left arm, soon replaced by the muscle back, a mysterious bionic weapon. He's accompanied by Mika Takekawa, a girl who also lost her memory. She can cook soft-boiled eggs. Mondo and Mika will have to face various enemies throughout the course of the game, most of which seemingly share nothing in common with each other, if not for a mysterious connection with the moon. The main antagonist of the game is David Mars, Mondo's brother, who for some reason has a different surname. He invites him to rule the moon with him. He killed his mother and overtook Moon River's castle. We'll get to who Moon River is at a later time. The game is structured as following: you have the individual episodes that compose the story, and for each episode you beat you unlock a bunch of secondary missions that take place in the same area of the completed episode. Within each episode you can find Scarlet, a character that will give you even more secondary missions. Outside of those you also have the infamous Gigolo minigame, where the point is to seduce a bunch of girls. Mondo Zappa can be upgraded in a variety of ways. You can unlock attacks, combos, and improve almost every metric available. I'd say this covers the basics. Structurally the game doesn't differ from most action games, at least from first glance, but alas, the devil is always in the details. The first thing you will notice, quite literally, when starting to play Killer is Dead is its unique aesthetics. Between the low saturation, the plain textures and the pitch-black hard shadows contrasted with the very powerful light reflection of the 3D models, this game can either look amazing, usually during cutscenes, or horrendous, usually during gameplay. It's a bold choice, the one of portraying the entire game like this, and one that I overall appreciate, but this is one of those times where something being ahead of its time isn't necessarily to its benefit. If Grasshopper tried to achieve a similar, let's say, anime effect with the technology of just a few years later, then the results would have been infinitely better. I know this line of thought could be applied to all games in general, but because of the aesthetic choices I mentioned, the graphics of Killer is Dead aged like milk. For comparison, take a look at El Shaddai, Ascension of the Metatron, another eccentric action game from that same generation of consoles. Because its strong visual identity relies more on timeless aspects such as character design and abstract scenery rather than some gimmicky technology, the game still looks jaw-dropping to this day, despite being 2 years older than Killer is Dead. Other than that, Suda's 2013 creation features animations that feel stilted and unnatural, mostly forgettable-looking areas and characters, with a few exceptions here and there, and a lot of rehashing of assets. Hidden beneath all of these flaws, though, there's also a few positive things worth mentioning. For example, particle effects do a great job at bringing more life to the already fast-paced action sequences, The camera work and editing for the cutscenes is excellent, with some really brilliant moments, especially during the memory sequences, and the UI, for how small of a detail it is, has a lot of personality. Of course, since we are rating the aesthetics, we also gotta include music, voice acting and sound design to the mix, and those are, on average, much better than their visual counterpart. The soundtrack for Killer is Dead is composed, in part, by Akira Yamaoka, known for its work on the Silent Hill saga. I have only played Shattered Memories, personally, and I can't remember a single track from that game, but then again, it's been a long time. There's other authors listed on the Wikipedia page, but I'm not familiar with any of them. Regardless of who composed the soundtrack, I think overall they did a pretty good job. There's no doubt a few pieces here and there that act as not much more than white noise for what's happening on screen, but for each of them there's a couple more that are very catchy in more than one way, depending on the occasion. I'll be using the game's soundtrack in the background for this video, with links in the description too, in case you want to better judge for yourself. I wouldn't say this is anywhere near as good as the stuff from the first three No More Heroes or Killer 7, but it holds its own, for sure. Voice acting is a bit harder to judge for me because I'm not a native English speaker. As far as I know, Grasshopper considers English a priority when it comes to voice acting, despite being a Japanese company. It's the first language they record, over the Japanese one, and they even lip-sync the characters with the English voices. I suppose it's to be expected that the English voice acting in English is better than the Japanese one, but then again, it's hard for me to tell. Since I'm not an expert, I'll avoid any technical judgment and just say that I like it. The actors do a great job at giving personality to the characters they interpret, in my opinion, and that's the most important thing to me. But at the end of the day, this is all fluff, stuff that doesn't matter. What we're really here for is not the graphics, but the gameplay, right? It's a video game, it's meant to be played, not looked at. And how fun is it to play? Let's find out. Now, a very important thing to consider about Killer is Dead as a whole is that it can be both very challenging and very easy in a way that is skewed, depending not exclusively on the difficulty scale, but also the player's skills. Let me explain. The swordplay itself, if we were to ignore any other aspect of the fighting mechanics that might interfere with it, is easily the most meritocratic part of the game. You have 5 levels of slashing speed. The longer you can keep up a combo, the higher the speed level is, and every time you kill an enemy at the highest level you get to pick your own reward between 4 different currencies, 2 that permanently increase health and blood respectively. I'll explain what blood is later, 1 to recuperate health and 1 to upgrade your skills. The higher the combo, the bigger the reward. Good reflexes are also rewarded by giving the player a few extra hits in slow motion for every dodge burst you pull off. What does this entail? If you're good at playing Killer is Dead, what's gonna happen is that the game will become even easier than it already is to you over time, because all the rewards you get directly cancel out any of the challenging aspect, even if you intentionally avoided upgrading any of your skills, since health and blood will increase automatically. But if you're bad at the game, then you get no increased speed, no slowdowns, no upgrades. It's a weird paradox. It exists to a degree in all games, but I've never seen it taken to such a counterintuitive extreme. Any good player who gets to the final boss of this game will have barely any trouble with him, because by that point he has become familiar with how easy to abuse the mechanics I just talked about are. Dual bosses are usually some of the funniest shit to go against when it comes to action games, because they leave you no time to breathe or rely on busted mechanics, yet, in Killer is Dead they seem specifically designed to be cheesed as quickly as you can manage. And that's not even taking in consideration the blood abuse. Blood can do many things. It can be used to use your muscle back to shoot with one of your weapons, it can be converted into health, or it can grant you a free kill for 90% of the enemies in the game, no matter how large their health pool is. All 3 things here can be abused in their own ways, especially in the later episodes, even more so by skilled players, as blood regenerates faster when you're doing combos at high speed. Let's start from the free kills, as they encapsulate the most what I said earlier about the difficulty getting lower the better you are at the game. I found it obscenely common to find myself with a full blood bar by killing minor enemies and then use it all to take out in a few seconds larger enemies that would have otherwise taken me more time and effort than that. Health regeneration, once fully upgraded, which can happen quite soon in a run, makes every fight a mere formality. Even the smallest amount of blood can give you back up to 25% of your health. There's almost no point in trying to avoid or parry anything. Weapons aren't as broken in most situations, but there's one, the charge cannon, that once fully upgraded does crazy damage against bosses. I know, these are all things that can be avoided, if so desired, but with how easy to access they are, the average player isn't gonna pass up on the opportunity to use them over having to fight the same 4 types of enemies over and over the traditional way. And why would he? The game invites him to abuse these mechanics. And this is why I like the Scarlet challenges so much, and I have tried to find all of them. They involve very specific stipulations that can be found nowhere else in the game, often making it hard to abuse the things I've listed so far. Enemies don't farm currencies, and the difficulty as a result is higher than anywhere else in the game. If every main episode had this level of variety and challenge, Killer is Dead would be a much better experience. Their ratings make no sense, but it's a small price to pay for good gameplay. Although on a smaller degree, the secondary missions, too, offer more stimulating gameplay than the hallway run that are the majority of the base episodes. But these one tend to be too hit or miss for me personally. I've talked about David already as a final boss, and how easy to exploit his patterns are, so let's run down all the other bosses for each episode of this game in chronological order, while we're at it. Episode 1, Tokyo, technically not a boss. Episode 2, Damon, technically not a boss. Episode 3, Alice, she's decent, her 3 phases don't differ that much from each other, having to use the muscle back to drag her out of the walls in your very first run, with pretty much no upgrades, and the base weapon is a bit of a pain in the ass, but other than that she's alright. Episode 4, David, this is just the first phase of the final boss, it will be reused in episode 12. Honestly, if we ignore the issues that plague Killer is Dead's combat and the blatant recycling, this boss battle is pretty good. In any other game I would have loved to fight David. Episode 5, Dolly, this character is featured in one of the top 2 worst boss fights in the whole game, this one being the very worst. Her episode 5 battle consists in having to chase and attack a bunch of slow-moving NPCs with predictable and safe patterns. The worst part, though, is when your camera randomly switches to the first-person perspective of one of said NPCs, making it harder to aim and attack in a way that doesn't feel challenging, just annoying. Episode 6, Victor, I like this one, maybe not so much the walk I had to make to get to him, but him as a boss. Cool character. His first 2 phases feature a decent variety of attacks and quick movements, nothing groundbreaking, but you know what they say, don't fix what's not broken, it's a fun fight so far. Unfortunately, his 3rd phase is a bit disappointing, he barely puts up a fight, and the time limit of 2 minutes is way too much to pose American Samoa a threat. Episode 7, Hamada Yama, best boss in Killer is Dead, hands down. His first phase is a dope bike chase sequence where you have to fight him and avoid obstacles at the same time, interactive enough, doesn't overstay its welcome, and didn't feel clunky like it's the case for many action games that try out this trope. Then the 2 remaining phases are even better, it's just non-stop close-range combat that puts to the test your reflexes like no other fight in the game, and where you're basically required to use your full range of skills to succeed. I think the 2nd phase is more challenging than the 3rd one, but that's the only real flaw I can attribute to Yama. Episode 8, David again, technically not a boss. Episode 9, Giant Head, this fight is too reliant on the muscle back, the only time you will use your sword is for the quick time event and to kill the random enemies that appear once in a while to obtain blood. You win by shooting the eyes of the giant and avoiding his slow attacks. Didn't have too much fun fighting this one. Episode 10, Tommy, yes, he's called Tommy, and yes, he's a talking train. But do you know what else he is? The 2nd worst fight after Dolly at episode 5, that's what. Unlike Giant Head, that requires you to use the muscle back to kill it, this one gives you the impression that you might also have the chance to use your sword once in a while, but don't bother, trust me. What you have to do instead is fully upgrade your bullet shot, make sure you show up to the fight with your blood bar full, and show no mercy to this fucker, because fighting him with any other method will take you a fucking eternity. Episode 11, Dolly again, another fight that asks you to use the muscle back way more than necessary. It wouldn't be bad, to be frank, if not for all the times in the 2nd phase in which you have to kick her out of those platforms in the air where she just stalls, and the only way to get her to continue the real fight is to spam your bullet shot. Episode 12, David, 3rd time's the charm. After replaying the same area from episode 4, but with tougher enemies, we get to the 1st phase of the final boss, which is the exact same as the full fight on episode 4, then we get to the 2nd phase, which is just weird, no better way to put it. Literally the only way you can damage him is by exploiting a dodge burst, A stupid easy thing to do when you're against David. The bigger problem is that the fight continues for a while even after you depleted his life bar because David needs to finish his speech and you have to spend the remaining time avoiding his predictable patterns and not much else. His third phase, the grand finale, is basically an easier version of his first phase. I'm not kidding. I couldn't even describe in detail what he feels like because of how short it is. Can't even enjoy the fantastic soundtrack because it gets interrupted for a few seconds every time I dodge burst. Then we also have episode 51, the DLC boss, Sebastian, a vampire dude who kills vampires. Don't remember his name. His role in the fight is to be a bullet sponge 90% of the time because he's always stuck in the air where you can't hit him with the sword. Like, really, I don't want to make it seem like I'm against the muscleback as a primary weapon by principle, in case that's the impression you've been getting. Distance combat can be fine in the occasions where it doesn't feel like a chore. Alice, for example, when she's in the walls she's not just standing there in place, waiting to be shot down, you have to follow her quick movements on top of dodging her attacks. How did they figure out this for the first boss but not all the ones that followed, the ones that are supposed to be harder? It boggles the mind. Like, consider this, even her attacks require more reflexes than the ones from enemies such as Giant Head or Sebastian. The difficulty in this game just makes zero sense, I tell you. One last thing before we move on to the story, the gigolo stuff. I'm gonna be brief. I don't give a shit about the sexual aspect of these mini-games one way or the other, regardless of your opinion on the matter, they're really not fun to play. You stare at them gals' tits while they're looking away to gain confidence, and once your bar is full you give them a gift of your choice to raise their love bar. Once that is full, you get a cutscene and a reward. Play these to unlock the extra weapons for the muscleback, if anything. Now, it's time for the main event of the evening. The story. And I'm gonna start with a warning, after finishing your first playthrough of the game you're gonna be very confused. That's normal, that's understandable. Many key details of the story are intentionally explained in a way that is very vague, or they're not explained at all. To better understand what's going on in Killer is Dead's crazy world, you gotta look up Theater Mode, a small guide that you unlock after beating the final boss which clears up a lot of the confusion surrounding the story by adding extra details to a character's backstory and explaining how some things work. This, and it didn't take me being a game designer for a few years to figure it out, is an awful way to set up a story in a video game. Needless to say, one shouldn't have to go read a fucking wiki to get the full understanding of a video game story. Or any other story, for that matter. So, here's what's going on. In short, David Mars used to be a government agent under Brian, just like Mondo is during the game's story, but after killing too many people his mind was corrupted by darkness, so he went crazy and took over the moon, with the intention to take the Earth next. In this world, darkness is a particle that comes from the moon and corrupts people's minds. So far so good. Mondo's bionic arm, the muscleback, which has been replaced by Brian, is an illegal weapon able to absorb the consciousness of the people it kills. It's much more powerful than all weapons of the same kind, and when it absorbs the consciousness of evil people their darkness influences the owner of the muscleback a lot more negatively than if by other means. Okay, here's where a few issues arise. First off, we are told by the Theater Mode that the reason Brian replaced Mondo's arm is so that he can use him specifically to kill David. I'm not taking words out of context, this is the primary reason. To kill the same David who went insane after darkness corrupted his mind, Brian decides to give his brother a weapon that makes its holder go insane even more easily. And not only that, instead of sending him straight to the moon to do the job immediately, in the hope that killing David and David alone won't cause him to get corrupted, nullifying their efforts, they instead decide to fuck around, they give him more corrupted people to kill, which end up consequently corrupting him, and guess what? This ends up nullifying their efforts in the end. Because Mondo conquers the moon once David is dead, and now Brian has to find someone else to kill Mondo. No wonder they made sure to explain the story of Killer is Dead as vaguely as possible, because it would take very little for anyone with a clearer understanding of the facts to see from a mile away how stupid of a plan it is. It's even more stupid if we take in consideration how David himself takes part in this act. He hires, or summons, or whatever, this girl, Dolly, to fuck up Mondo's memories, to make him forget of their past as brothers. To what end? Well, we don't know. He wants to offer Mondo a role as ruler of the Earth. It's the first thing he tells him. So, despite his evil influence, he still loves him as a brother? But he also kills their own mom in cold blood. Which is it? There's nothing that indicates that David has any reason, legitimate or not, to kill the mom, and there's nothing that indicates that David feels remorse for killing her. Like, a good theory would be that David realizes the gravity of killing her, so he wants to wipe away Mondo's memory and show him some affection in the only way his warped mind can, by offering him a throne, but this is all conjecture, not even theater mode is of any help on the matter. Just like it can't help in explaining what the fuck is Moon River's role in Mondo's childhood. What we know of her is that at one point she risks drowning while they were playing together, and that the accident changed him. How? Who knows? Why? Who the fuck knows either, she's not dead. And she acts as she never met him before when she commissions David's death. Some think that because of this it's her who asked Dolly to delete Mondo's memories, and not David, but again? To what end? None of this is ever explained, unfortunately. And yeah, that's the game. If you check the feather mode, you'll know that there's also a bunch of metaphoric bullshit about each key character representing a planet, or something. I'm not even gonna go over that, frankly, it has no significance whatsoever to the events that transpire in Killer is Dead. It's straight up pointless information. I was very disappointed by how bad this game aged in my eyes. There's very little content that tries to redeem the overall experience, it's such a pretentious experience, and it's not fun to play either to justify playing it if you don't care about the story. One could say, it's a true Suda 51 game.